Good evening. Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Today, the FBI announced that it is investigating the San Bernardino massacre as an act of terrorism. Law enforcement agents said the suspects, Syed Rizwan Farook and his wife Tashfeen Malik, had been in telephone contact with other possible terror suspects in the United States. A Facebook official confirmed to the Associated Press that Malik had posted a pledge of allegiance to ISIS under an alias. The FBI also said neither Farook nor Malik were on the agency's radar. Agents completed a search of the suspect's home yesterday, and today, the landlord allowed reporters in to see the location where investigators found an arsenal of ammunition and homemade bombs. A news agency affiliated with the Islamic State describes the couple as, quote, supporters of the group, but did not claim responsibility for the attack. Joining me now to discuss these developments is Congressman Eric Swalwell, a member of the House Intelligence Committee and a Democrat representing Hayward and Pleasanton. Welcome.
Thank you, Thuy.
From what you have been told, is this an ISIS-inspired attack?
I've been briefed twice on this, and when you look at the travel of the couple, when you look at the contact they had with suspected terrorists, when you look at the arsenal of weapons they had, and the fact that a message of support to ISIS was posted before the attack, all of the arrows point to terrorism.
This couple was not on any watch list or on the radar of law enforcement. What does this say about the government's ability to track down these types of people and prevent such attacks in the U.S.?
It's quite concerning. When you look at the Paris attacks, those individuals were on the French government's watch list. Here, however, it shows that ISIS is so influential these days that they don't even have to order attacks. Their success is inspiring them.
And so these are homegrown terrorists who are not only consuming perhaps propaganda, but deciding to act on it.
These are individuals who have been self-radicalized. And what we've found is that the self-radicalization process, it can happen in a matter of weeks. Now, the FBI is doing everything they can to really go back into the lives of these individuals, find out their travel patterns, find out their patterns of life, and learn when exactly it happened and who else could be in the United States that they were related to.
Farook appeared to be a law-abiding citizen. Malik, his wife, had passed security background checks in order to gain a conditional green card to reside legally in this country. Given all of that, given the normalcy, the apparent normalcy of all that, is it possible to prevent such attacks?
It's really concerning because Farook had a baby shower at his office not too long ago. I mean, there's nothing more just normal than somebody who has a baby shower. And so if someone like that could pull off an attack like this, certainly we have to wonder who else is out there plotting. And this, again, just goes to show that until we take out the nerve center that ISIS has in Syria and Iraq, they're going to continue to be able to dispatch not only attacks that they order, but through their propaganda, inspire people that we don't even know about yet.
So how do we take out those nerve centers? What else needs to be done at this point?
This is going to take American leadership, unlike anything we've seen since World War II, which means putting together a coalition of Western countries, of Islamic countries, and even countries that we may not have ever thought we'd be working with, like Russia. You know, back in 1939, you never would have thought that the United States and Russia would team up to fight Germany. They had a non-aggression pact with Germany at that time. Instead, we became allies with them and defeated Nazi Germany and Japan. Today, I think we need to look at what countries have the interests that we share in defeating ISIS and taking away that central node they have in the Middle East.
What about here on the domestic front? What more needs to be done in Congress via legislation to address this?
Well, whether it's a group that is carrying out an attack because they're inspired by religion or because they're carrying out an attack that's inspired by a political agenda, like we saw with the Planned Parenthood attack just a week ago. Too many dangerous individuals in this country have access to too many dangerous weapons. We need to ban assault weapons once and for all in this country. We need to make sure that if you are on a terror watch list, if you're too dangerous to get on a plane, then we should be able to conduct a background check to see if you're too dangerous to own a firearm.
And in fact, more than 2,000 people on the terror watch list have been able to buy firearms legally.
That's concerning, and it was a sad night in America last night when the U.S. Senate, almost every Republican member and one Democratic member voted to prevent us from having background checks on people who are on the terror watch list. You would think that would be the simplest group we could all agree on should be having a background check performed if they want to own a firearm.
I want to ask you also about President Obama. He has said that the country is safe, don't worry, go enjoy your holiday season. Given what we know now, and given today's declaration that this is a terror investigation, a terrorism investigation, does the White House need to be sending a more cautious message?
We can't live in fear, but we are also not powerless to stop this from happening again. And I think it's a combination of showing American leadership with other countries who we can put together this coalition to go after ISIS. But right now, ISIS is more coordinated than we are. Also, making sure that the weapons that these terrorists are able to access, making sure that they are no longer as accessible as they are. We're never going to stop every single gun violence death in this country. It's going to be something that will continue to happen. But we can greatly reduce the amount of deaths by gun violence if Congress stops having moments of silence and starts having moments of actions to do something about the gun culture in America.
Law enforcement authorities have long warned of lone wolf attacks, but this seems to be different. Before this week, Farook and Malik seems like any normal couple. Young, new baby, law-abiding. How does this change your understanding of how we need to combat terrorism?
The old model of looking for plotting among people who are greatly dedicated to a cause, like we saw with Al-Qaeda, has evolved. And now we're seeing that terrorist groups like ISIS from abroad, through their propaganda and messaging, can inspire people who are carrying out everyday lives and, as I said, are having baby showers. And so what we need to do is make sure that people are vigilantly looking at clues of self-radicalization, looking at what their friends are posting on social media, and wondering, is this person dangerously close to taking on an action like we saw 2 days ago in San Bernardino. And
just real quickly, in the short term, the House Intelligence Committee, are you going to do anything related to these attacks in terms of legislation and proposals?
Before we leave for the holiday break, there has been talk back in Congress on reforming the visa waiver program. Now, there are dozens of countries over in Western Europe where U.S. citizens can travel there without a visa, and those folks can travel here. Making sure that those countries are sharing intelligence about suspected terrorists with us to protect us here at home is at the top of all of our minds, and I think there might be action on that.
All right. Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Law enforcement officials say the weapons used in the San Bernardino massacre were purchased legally, but they say that someone other than the two suspects purchased the two assault rifles. That person has not been identified or charged. The incident in San Bernardino was the worst mass shooting in the United States this year. 14 people were killed, another 21 were injured. Most of the victims worked for San Bernardino County. The shootings have amplified calls for tighter restrictions on gun purchases. But as you just heard, there is strong resistance in Congress to changing existing laws. Stanford law professor John Donohue has been studying gun policies. He joins me now. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
According to your research, what kinds of gun policies reduce gun violence?
Well, there are a number of things that could be effective in this arena. One thing that federal law has tried to do is to keep guns away from felons and those with serious mental illness. But it's hard to achieve that goal without having universal background checks. So that's one policy that President Obama has been pushing for. Congress has been reluctant to move in that direction.
But how effective are background checks, though?
Well, everything depends on how universal a particular measure is, because the narrower the focus of the control, the the easier it is for individuals to skirt the control. So right now in California, we have universal background checks, but of course, Nevada and Arizona, bordering states, do not. So it's very easy for someone to buy a gun there and just drive it over the border. If you can get to a more universal approach, that has an obvious benefit.
So do you think that's where the loophole was? Because California has the strictest gun control laws in the country, and yet the suspects in this case got their guns legally. Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, of course, you can't make gun policy based on just one single case. And what we do is we look across the whole statistical field of data. You get the sense that there are some policies that will hopefully curtail violence. You're never going to be able to stop all shootings and all violence, but sensible measures, I think, can reduce gun violence in reasonable ways.
Are there measures that Congress could take now that would have a real impact on public safety?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's unfortunate. We had a assault weapon ban in place in this country from 1994 to 2004, and probably things would be better today if that law had been maintained. It's going to be hard to move back in that direction given the current composition of Congress, where there's a fair amount of opposition to an assault weapon ban. But I do think this is a battle that will go forward, and we will see universal background checks at some point. And at some point, if the continued trend, we see a growing number of these active shooter scenarios, as that grows, at some point, I think we're going to revisit the assault weapon ban and limitation on high-capacity magazines.
But in the meantime, we still have an instance just this week. Despite this latest rampage, we just heard Congressman Swalwell talk about the vote that happened on Thursday when the Senate voted down a measure that would have made it harder for suspected terrorists to buy firearms. Are there any portions of gun control where agreement could be reached in Washington next year?
A lot will depend on what the public is willing to do. There's overwhelming approval for things like universal background checks, limitations on high-capacity magazines, and so forth. But the public has not been willing to express that in their votes for politicians. When that preference is heard, the politicians will listen, I think.
You know, we have New York's former mayor, Michael Bloomberg. He's launched a new program to try to back pro-gun control candidates. We have Gavin Newsom now, who's running for governor in 2018. He's got a gun control measure out. What are the prospects of those things passing and making a real difference? Do you think that this massacre could be the tipping point? Because we heard the same cries after Sandy Hook. School children were killed. This has got to be the final cry where people say, we need some really comprehensive gun control. It never happened.
It hasn't happened yet. I do think we're on a trend, according to recent FBI data, that the number of active shootings are growing at an increasing rate. And so at some point, I think the pressure for Congress to do something in this arena will rise. As you said,
at what point would that happen, do you think?
Obviously, we're not there yet, but as you mentioned, at some point, some terrorist on the terror watch list is going to shoot up a public arena, and there will be a lot of anger at the politicians who have resisted making that a prohibited purchaser. There really is no plausible rationale for allowing terrorists on the terror watch list to buy guns, but currently NRA opposition in Congress is enough to forestall that action.
Well, and in fact, the NRA and many gun owners, in fact, even the lawyer for Mr. Farook's family, say it's important to protect the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. What does current law say about limiting the ownership of guns and ammunition?
Well, this is something that's being worked out in the courts, and you know, some people think that there should be no restrictions on whatever type of gun you want to own. But the courts are consistently giving a message that reasonable restrictions on the type of weapon and the power of weapon and the number of bullets that are allowed in a capacity magazine are reasonable measures, and I think that the Supreme Court will endorse those measures as these cases percolate up to the Supreme Court. So the first thing we have to do is figure out what are the best measures, and then try to get the public to encourage the politicians to follow their lead. All
right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Professor John Donohue with Stanford.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
The San Francisco Police Department is facing intense scrutiny following an officer-involved shooting on Wednesday. At least 3 witnesses captured the incident on their cell phone cameras. In one video, you can see several officers with their weapons aimed at 26-year-old Mario Woods, who police say was carrying a knife. KQED's Alex Emsley has been following the investigation. Alex, thanks for joining me. Well, that video, very troubling to watch, obviously. What led up to this shooting?
Well, the police say that there was a stabbing victim who showed up at San Francisco General Hospital about an hour before that tape that you see there, who reported that a person gave a description, had stabbed him in the shoulder a few blocks away from where this video was shot. Police searched for that suspect. Were about to give up, actually, so they couldn't find him, and two officers found him, and then he had a knife, police say, and that led up to the incident on video.
And the person in the video is Mario Woods. He died. What can you tell us about him?
Well, he has a criminal record. He was named in a gang injunction that the city brought in late 2000, initially in 2007, and then again updated when he was actually named was in 2009. They say that he was a part of the Oakdale mob gang and was validated in that way. If you know something about gang validation, though, those are often questioned and were questioned by family members and friends of Mario Woods at vigil last night. They say he was never a gang member. He was seen hanging out with people who the police say were gang members.
So he has a criminal record. He was known to law enforcement. Many people, though, who see this video, and it has been seen by quite a lot of people on social media, will look at it and say, regardless of his conviction history and his troubled past, was that justified force? What kinds of investigations are going on right now?
No, there's several, but they're all sort of under the auspices of the city and county of San Francisco, right? The medical examiner is doing an autopsy. San Francisco police are doing a criminal investigation into just the incident in general. They'll also eventually do an internal affairs investigation, which is just regular. Is just
it's protocol.
Yeah, protocol
and at least 5 officers have been placed on administrative leave. That's protocol as well.
That is protocol as well. For 10 days minimum, all the officers who fired in this incident will be on administratively reassigned. They say they're not necessarily on leave. They have a lot of tasks that they have to complete in this time, including a criminal interview where homicide investigators, district attorneys investigators will talk to them about this incident.
There have been community protests about this, a number of people upset. What is San Francisco's Police Chief Greg Suhr saying about it?
Well, I think that he's allowing the legal process to play out while also explaining sort of protocol around use of deadly force by police when they are faced with a suspect who, according to police, is armed with a knife.
And in this case, they had used pepper spray. They had used beanbags prior to the shots being fired. That's
true. Yes, they call those less lethal types of force that they used. According to police, to try to get the suspect to Mr. Woods to drop the knife. San Francisco police aren't armed with tasers. That's something that, according to police officers that I've spoken to on background since this incident, they say this is another incident that shows why we need tasers. But that's been very controversial in San Francisco. Sure. People against tasers don't want police to use them as a compliance device, they say, to enforce punishment on people.
This is the San Francisco Police Department's 6th officer-involved shooting so far this year. Has Chief Suhr made any changes to department policy or to training to try to reduce such shootings?
I think that he has, yeah, and not necessarily this year, but a little bit before, a little bit in the past. He put out a bulletin that I think has something to do with this case, especially because there was an instruction that went out over the radio, 2 officers responding to the scene, referencing this department bulletin. It's called Create Time, Distance, and Rapport. When a suspect is not a danger to anyone else, officers have been instructed under Suhr to step back and allow for some amount of de-escalation. This is specifically in response to a high percentage of shootings of people with a mental illness, really all over the country, but in San Francisco as well. But once a suspect starts to present a danger either to officers on the scene or to the general public, then the time, distance, and rapport thing is sort of overruled by public safety concerns.
And Chief Suhr has made the contention that the officer felt like his life was in danger here and that he was in the path of danger.
That is what I understand from the chief's comments as well, yeah. But I think you'll let the process play out.
By coincidence, on the same day as the shooting, the San Francisco Police Commission voted on a new policy for body cameras worn by officers. At stake was whether officers should be able to view videos before filing their incident report. So what did the commission decide? Right.
So the body camera policy is broad, but that one little portion of it was an area of great contention. And the commission, I think they made a compromise. They didn't say officers are never allowed to view their footage after an officer-involved shooting or a critical incident like this, but they didn't say they're automatically allowed to either. What they said was the chief of police or his or her designee has to make that call. And what I hear from commissioners is that they're very interested to look back at this in about 6 months and see if officers are always allowed to view the footage when it's left up to the chief.
And in an incident like this, would it have made a difference to have those body cameras on? Would we have actually seen the incident from perhaps other angles and have more clarity on the situation?
Well, I think the sort of big selling point or thing that people are looking forward to with body cameras in San Francisco is that you get the police officer's perspective as close as you can get with a electronic device that's equipped somewhere on someone's body, right?
And more visual evidence, hopefully. Yes. All right. Alex Emsley, thank you.
Thank you.
This week's big idea is called shock and kill. It's an approach that researchers at UCSF say could lead to a cure for HIV. On Monday, those scientists received a $20 million grant from AMFAR, the Foundation for AIDS Research, to test that approach. Dr. Paul Vorberding, who has dedicated his career to ending HIV and AIDS, is directing the research, and he joins us now. Dr. Vorberding, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Well, you have been researching and treating people infected with HIV for 34 years. You've seen a lot of promises, some realized, some not. You've also seen a lot of progress over the years. What is shock and kill, and do you think it could lead to a cure?
Well, we sure hope it can lead to a cure. The idea is that in people with HIV who have been treated with the drugs that we have, which are very good, there still is a certain amount of virus in the body hiding out in cells, and we call that the reservoir of the virus. The idea with shock and kill is that we want to find those cells, activate them so that the body sees them and that the immune system brings them under control, or that we might use other drugs to kill those cells. So we want to shock the cells, wake them up, let them show that they have HIV, and then come in with other approaches to kill them off, to decrease the reservoir.
And what are the challenges in that? Because HIV hides in immune cells. Is it a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack?
It's a lot like finding a needle in a haystack. The problem with HIV, the central problem with HIV, is that it becomes part of your own DNA. And in these cells, they're infected. The DNA of the person now has the DNA of the virus, and it's just lying there. And so we need to wake it up so that the body can see those cells.
Medications have come a long way. They have effectively blocked HIV, enabling people to live pretty much normal lifespans now. But those drugs are not considered a cure. Why is that?
The drugs we have are amazing. We've made incredible progress in controlling this virus, and people can now live with their HIV infection, taking as little as 1 pill per day. But when we stop the medicines, if we do, or if the person stops the medicines on his or her own, what we see inevitably is that the virus comes back. So we know that the virus has been in the body despite the person being on treatment, and that's the problem. We haven't been able to cure the virus, even though the drugs are really amazingly potent.
So are there advances then in other diseases that you are now able to adapt and see if it works for HIV, cancer, for example?
There's an exciting development going on in cancer where the immunology of cancer is now being manipulated to help the body recognize cancer cells and control them. We're hoping to use some of that same approach to try to cure HIV infection. But HIV has also been a great model for other diseases. Hepatitis C virus is now curable using some of the same approaches to drug development as we've done with HIV.
According to the World Health Organization, more than 35 million people globally are infected with HIV. Are you confident that you can take the discoveries you make here and make them available to other countries, especially poorer countries, resource-challenged countries?
We do a lot of work in San Francisco abroad in resource-limited countries, especially in Africa, and they really need a cure. They need a cure probably more than we do, and so one of the things that we're trying to do in this institute is come up with treatments like shock and kill that might be able to be developed in a very inexpensive form. That's part of our goal with this institute.
Prevention is still key to fighting HIV. What are we learning about effective prevention measures?
What we've learned is that we have these amazing prevention measures in hand. The drugs we have now to treat HIV infection can be used to prevent HIV infection, and the drugs can be used if the person is being treated, we know that the virus no longer is transmitted. So we can stop almost all forms of transmission of HIV with the drugs we already have. Now the approach is to find all the people that are infected, and that's something that San Francisco is leading the way in, getting to zero.
What makes you hopeful at this point that we're closer to a cure now, more so now than ever?
Well, we haven't been very close in the past, but now I think we have the combination of great drugs that are very potent, again, very convenient and relatively non-toxic, and technologies that allow us to really look for the reservoir, look for these infected cells hiding in the body. And if we can combine those approaches and apply some of what we've learned about the immunologic control, the body's own control of the virus, we think that we can make some progress.
So 10 years from now, do you think you can say, we have found a cure for HIV?
You know, the future is hard to predict. And I think we can promise that in 5 years, we will have learned a lot in this effort. And if we can then take that and apply it to actually treating people, I think it'll take us another 5 years to know if we're able to cure this virus. But I think it's hopeful.
And this $20 million grant is certainly a great way to get that going. Dr. Volberding, thank you so much.
Great being here.
And I'm Thuy Vu. That does it for our program for tonight. Thanks for watching. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.